Hello to everyone. My name is Athanasios Fourtounas. I'm a senior instructor of Human Asset, which is an affiliated training provider of PM2 Alliance, but also I'm PM2 trainer. Today, we will speak for an hour or so about tackling risks in the PM2 way. The agenda of my presentation is depicted on the slide. I will start by speaking about the importance of risk management in projects. Then, what kind of role stakeholders play in risk management, why we need a solid risk management plan, and how to identify and assess known and unknown risks. Moreover, how we can deal effectively with risks by developing risk responses. And of course, what is the power of monitoring your project risks? For all these topics, I will try to give you a number of best practices according to my experience in the risk management field that I am for 8 years now. So let's start. Let's start with the terminology. According to PM2 Guide, risk is an uncertain event, positive or negative, that if occurs, will have an effect on the achievement of project objectives. From this sentence, we can see the two faces of risks, threats and opportunities. Because the common mistake is that when we are referring to risks, we think that it is only threats, but there is another side, which is the opportunities. Also, in PM2 Guide, it is mentioned that risk is measured by a combination of the likelihood and by the size of the impact. So here we can see the two dimensions of risks. An event, in order to be called risk, it has to have a likelihood of occurrence, but also an impact on project objectives, cost, time, scope, and quality. Otherwise, if it has only a likelihood of occurring and doesn't have any impact on our project, it is just an uncertain event. Moreover, risk management is a continuous, proactive, and systematic process. It's an iterative process. And we can see on the slide at the bottom the 4 steps of risk management, which is risk identification, risk assessment, risk response development, and risk control. But before start describing these steps, let's speak a little bit about the importance of risk management in the project. We can see that risk management is important from the initiation process of PM2. You can find out in the initiation request high-level risks, but also in the other 2 artifacts, project business case and project charter, where we are mentioning the high-level risks. Also, during the initiation process, the risk log is being made. And of course, we are dealing with risks in all the other phases of a project, like planning, executing, closing. And of course, we monitor risks during monitor and control activities. Also, if we don't apply risk management in our projects, the result will be one of the 2 of these 2 pictures. Like an ostrich, hiding our heads inside the sand because we think that if we don't see something, it will never happen. But also, we might showing the log that we are sitting on, like the gentleman is doing on the picture on the right, and the results are obvious. So risk management is a necessity. But before starting to writing down our risk management plan, which can be a part of the project handbook, or as an appendix, or as a separate plan which is connected to our project handbook, or maybe before starting tailoring or customizing to our project the risk management plan of the company or of the organization that we are working on, we have to think about our stakeholders, and we have to retrieve a lot of information from the stakeholder matrix. That's why what I'm proposing is, during my workshops, if you have a big project and you have also a big number of project team members, and you have specific people who are dealing with the risk, delegate one of them to go and join the stakeholder management team at the beginning of the project, so as to retrieve information about the stakeholders. And of course, you have also to read before that the project charter, the project work plan, and the business case. You are, of course, in the planning stage. Why? Because you need information like not only the name of the stakeholder, but also the risk appetite of the stakeholder, the risk tolerance, the risk scope, the risk threshold, how he wants to deal with risk. That's why during also my workshops, I'm starting with the identification of the stakeholders, the stakeholder analysis, and also how to plan the stakeholder engagement, how to manage them. And you can see here on the slide, we are identifying the stakeholders as positive, negatives, or neutral, using post-its of different color. Then we analyze them according to the power and the interest they have, the power to influence our project, and the interest to do that, to use that power. But also, as a third template here, according to the power, and if they have a high power, what we will do with them in order to engage them. And whoever has a low power, we will put him in a monitor stage. Why? Because stakeholders brings their own risks with them inside the project. So here you can see a risk workshop that I was doing with a company which was producing coffee, and also they have a lot of hundreds of coffee shops in Greece and all over the world. The first thing we did was to identify our stakeholders. So we put on the table our SWOT analysis, lesson learned, the mission of the company, and also, of course, the vision, but the objectives of the project. And you know, the first half an hour, 45 minutes, the team had identified 10, 15 stakeholders from all these documents, but they were stuck. So they told me, Thanasis, we cannot identify more stakeholders. We don't have the inspiration. So I showed them this picture and I asked them, what it is depicted on this picture? And they told me, well, it is the life cycle of the coffee. Exactly what I told them. So try to figure out who is participating in this life cycle of the coffee, who can influence your coffee project, or who can be influenced by your coffee projects. So they started to shouting, yes, it will be the farmers in Latin America and Africa that they are cultivating the coffee. It can be the company that they are buying the coffee and they are moving it to roast it. It is our laboratories that we are using to check the quality of the coffee, and also the shops we have and they are selling the coffee. So in the next hour, we had identified at least 50 stakeholders, and the results, you can see them here. So the person who will represent the risk team in the stakeholder process will come back to the risk team with the stakeholder matrix and a lot of information about stakeholders. And this information will be used in order to write down a solid risk management plan. And you can find, of course, in the PM2 artifacts, templates about the risk management plan. So I will not get inside details what exactly it is contained inside the risk management plan, but I will give you a couple of best practices. First of all, the risk management plan, it is our GPS. It is our toolbox. Why? Because whenever we need something, guidance, how we will execute a risk step, we will open this folder, which is called risk management plan, and read it. And inside there, you can find the methodology that we will use, how much time and money you have to spend for this methodology. Who will do what, the roles and responsibilities, what kind of templates you will use, and of course, the sample of your risk log. Also, you have to remember that you cannot copy and paste all the time your risk management plan and use it for every project. Every project is unique, so one size doesn't fit all. So let's check a little bit of the elements of this risk management plan. The first paragraph is methodology, the methodology of risk activities. So in that paragraph, you have to describe in which sequence the risk activities takes place in all the processes of risk management. What kind of tools and techniques you will use, which will be first, which will be last. And of course, you have to write it in a future tense. So first, we are describing how you will conduct the risk identification and what kind of templates probably you will use. Then how you will execute the risk assessment. And you have to connect that with what kind of templates and scales you will use. Then the risk response development, and of course, the risk control. After you have filled in this paragraph with all the risk activities, you go to the other two paragraphs, the timing and the budget of the risk activities. So you have to write down how much time each activity will take place and how much money it will cost. Not only the money of executing an activity, but also, for example, the money that you will use for materials in order to do that. And as a fourth paragraph, it will be the roles and responsibilities of risk activities. And here, a great help is the Rasky diagram that we already have inside the PM2 guide, where it says for specific risk activities, who is responsible, who is accountable, who is informed, etc. For example, as you can see here, and it is pointed with a laser, the risk management plan, accountable is the project owner, responsible is the project manager, but the project manager who is actually doing the work, it can ask the consultant of the business manager and of course of the project steering committee. And he has to inform about what he's doing for the big, the solution provider, and the project core team, and of course the AGB. Another crucial thing, and a common mistake because it is we don't have it in our mind, is we have to integrate these risk activities to our project work plan. From one of my projects, you can see here that the last templates that I'm putting on my risk wall is the WBS from the scope team, the Gantt chart from the schedule team, and the budget from the budget team. So every risk activity has to be inserted first in the WBS, then inside the Gantt chart, because it will actually take some time to execute it. And of course, if it costs some money, you have also to calculate it in your budget. And how you can do that? With actually paying a visit to the space where the other project team members are working. So pay first a visit to the scope team members and tell them, hello guys, here are my risk activities, the risk activities that the risk team will execute. Please insert them inside your work breakdown structure. Then pay a visit to the colleagues that they are dealing with the schedule and give them your timing paragraph from the risk management plan. Here is my activities and how much time they will take. Please insert them in the Gantt chart of the project. Then to the project, to the budget team members, and give them the money that you need for these risk activities and ask them to insert that inside the budget of the project. Last but not least, to the HR team and give them the roles and responsibilities with the names, asking them not to send for a trip or for a training or for a leave, etc. Specific team members that you have in your risk team that you want to use them for specific things, let's say for a qualitative risk analysis or the development of responses. Why you are doing that? Because you can achieve the project integration that way, which means not working in silos, every team, but work all together and not parallel for a common cause, to achieve the outcomes and the benefits of the project. Of course, as a last step, you have to choose the proper templates that you will use during the risk management process. And here you can see on the slide, for the identify risk, we have chosen to use a risk breakdown structure for opportunities, a similar one, not the same, for threats, and with a specific post-its with a specific color for its risk category. Also, here it is depicted the likelihood and impact matrix, and you can see it with a lot of names where we will use it for the risk assessment. The size, especially of the RBS, is being influenced by the stakeholder attitude towards risk. So if someone is risk averse, probably this stakeholder needs a lot of information, so the RBS will become wider. And probably if someone is risk seeker, the risk breakdown structure will become smaller. So let's see how actually we are implementing this risk management plan during the 4 risk processes. Risk identification. A couple of best practices here. The first one is that when you start your risk identification process, try to remember to think outside the box. So you will not have the perfect solution hiding inside the box. You have to look outside this box and of course inside your project. Try to imagine, try to be creative, and try to figure out what might go wrong, but also what might get right. You have to identify as much as threats, as much as opportunities. The second best practice, what I'm also doing in my risk workshops, when you start to use the brainstorming tool, send the CEO, send the project owner, maybe members of the AGB or the solution provider or board members outside the room. Tell them, please, as I did here with the fertility clinic when we were conducting a risk workshop, Dimitris and Alexia, please, the people with the red arrow on their heads, go and check your emails. You have a lot of job to do for the next 2 hours. Go and have a coffee, check your messages, etc. Why I have done that, and you can see on the right picture with the cycles, the chairs are empty, because I wanted all the other team members that they were participating on the workshop to feel relaxed, to be able to express themselves as much easy as possible. I didn't want the CEO and the board member to dominate the workshop. I wanted to facilitate as much as easy. Why? Because you can identify a lot of threats and opportunities. The people will speak freely, and then call them back, present them what you have found with the team without knowing who has identified what, and then ask for their opinion or their contribution. During the identify risk process, you have to put everything on the table. You have to examine everything. Procurements, the calendar, the budget, the human resources, assumptions and constraints, everything. And the first step of putting everything on the table, all the plans, in order to check the consistency between them, it is called desk reviews. Try to find out if a team didn't work as an with the integration, but he worked in a silo. Try to find out that the project handbook and the project work plan are combined together, are integrated. Of course, do not forget to check and analyze the constraints and the assumptions of your project. You have to review everything. You have to analyze it, because constraints and assumptions are the main causes of risks. And for me, What I'm using during my risk workshops in order to identify risks is this sequence of tools and techniques. I'm always starting with the desk reviews, as I said before, to check the consistency of all the documents and the plans inside the project. Then I'm continuing with a brainstorm with the team, as I told you, without having high management members inside the room at the beginning. At the same time, I might run, if I have the money and the ability, a Delphi technique with 3 to 5 subject matter experts. Next, it will be some interviews with subject matter experts again, in order to search in a much better depth for specific categories of risks. What are the threats and opportunities? For example, legal risks, budget risks, technical risks, cultural risks, etc. And then, if I have an experienced team, risk team, I will use SWOT analysis and other more sophisticated tools like force field analysis, Ishikawa diagrams, influence diagrams, etc. And I'm always finishing with these here 3 tools. The pre-mortem technique, what is the best case scenario, what is the worst case scenario, a prompt list, and my favorite one is the PESTLE analysis, because it contains inside environmental risks that usually we are forgetting them. And last but not least is the risk checklist that probably the project support team is delivering to us, and we use it at the end and not at the beginning, because if we use it at the beginning we might have a tunnel vision, but we use it at the end, and we are updating also this list and we are giving it back to the project support team for next projects. So actually, during the workshops, encourage your risk team to write every risk in a single post-it. And you can see here in these post-its how they are being made. And the color is according to the category of risk. And then the team has to put everything on the risk breakdown structures, as you can see here with my students in the university. In case that your project needs to outsource materials, activities, human workforce, then do not search only in the areas that you can see in red cycles, which is the obvious ones. Think outside the box. Think all the processes and all the stakeholders that can cause threats or opportunities to your projects. Like you can see here, delivery delays, price and currency fluctuations, spoilage, diversion in great market, pandemic, like we are experiencing today with the COVID-19, natural disasters or political upheaval, the black swans that you will, risks that you will probably, you will hear in a couple of hours, strikes, etc. Remember that when you are using a third party, it can be a great help, but the reputation risks stays on your shoulders. The client side or the client itself or the AGB knows you. He doesn't know and he doesn't want to know the subcontractor. So at the beginning of the identify risk process, the templates are like this. The RBS is empty, but after the identification of the risks, it is like this, full of post-its. Another best practice is the motto, quantity is quality during identify risk process. We have to identify as much risks as possible. Of course, whatever we write on post-its, we have to log it also inside the risk log, the artifact risk log. And you can see here a specific category from the RBS, a single title of the risk, like GDPR or materials, a description of the risk, and you have to put it in one sentence with a specific way. You have to write it, cause, risk, effect. And you can see here on the artifact an example. Of course, do not forget to put the status of that risk in this specific moment. Who has identified it, the risk originator, as it is called in the bibliography, and of course, when this has been identified. After having updated the risk log, you can go to the next step, which is the risk assessment. As one of my assessors says, Plutarch, everyone has the right to express his opinion. Quantity is quality, as we said in Identify Risks. But does he has the knowledge to support it? And this is the risk assessment. We have not only to give estimations about probability and impact, but also to be able to support these estimations, how we came up with these results. So, at the beginning of the risk assessment, everything is like a plate of spaghetti, complicated, connected together in a very strange ways. It is called the spaghetti connection. Even the IT guys can tell you that. And why this is happening? Because we have a lot of stakeholders on our wall, and we don't even know exactly the connection between them. Also, what it is called stakeholder promiscuity. Also, we have a lot of risks inside our RBS. Everything it is connected, but we don't know exactly how. So we have to prioritize everything during the risk assessment to see what it is for the threats, the most dangerous ones, and what it is not. And when I'm being asked during my workshops, what it will be the way of thinking, the concept that we can use in risk assessment, I'm giving them the example of an airplane cockpit. One day when I was traveling from Italy to Greece with a military airplane, the pilots were a friend of mine, so they called me in their cockpit, and I was amazed because it was also night, about how much instruments they had to monitor, how much screens, buttons, indicators, etc. And I said, oh guys, you have only 2 sets of eyes. So how you can monitor so many things? And they told me, we are prioritizing the things that we have to monitor according to their severity. So we always check altimeter, our orientation, the fuel, the landing gear, etc. All the others, if we have time, we will check them. So this is what we want to do now, to prioritize the risks in a way so as to be able then to develop our responses. And a very useful tool to do that are the scales that we have for likelihood and impact, and we can find them inside our risk management plan. Do not forget to use, especially for the scales for impact, a separate one for cost, another one for time, another one for scope, and another one for quality, depending on the risk tolerance of the stakeholder in these 4 project objectives. Also, do not forget that you have to use in that phase also your likelihood and impact matrix. So you can see here that there is a lot of names that you might find in bibliography, this template. Likelihood and impact matrix, you can see it as probability and impact matrix, heat map, risk matrix, lookup table, etc. So how you use this template? Well, you ask the team members. Here is the post-it about the risk, technical risk. So you are reading the risk to the team, and you are asking them for an estimation for probability, for likelihood and impact. And according to the estimation of likelihood and impact, and multiplying them in order to find the risk level of that risk, you are placing them in the specific point of the likelihood and impact matrix. It is like a map where are the likelihood and the impact. And you can see here, it is separate for threats and another one for opportunities. Also, a crucial point is, in a best practice, try to achieve consensus between your risk team members. You can see me here on this picture trying to achieve a concession by negotiating with 3 different teams about the 3 different estimations for probability and impact for a single risk. You will have conflicts like that all the time during the risk assessment. So you have to achieve consensus, and you have probably to mention inside your risk management plan by what will be the method that you will use for these consensus. You will always follow, for example, the subject matter expert opinion. You will use PERT technique. You will use something else. Depends on you. But try to achieve consensus. Try to engage everyone in this process. Or maybe you can use the average value. And of course, all this data, you have to insert them in the risk log. And also, because the risk log is an Excel file, you can put a filter there at the end so as to prioritize the risks that you have inside according to the risk level here. Also, be careful if a risk has to be escalated or not. Here are 2 risks. There is no need to be escalated, but if one risk it is out of your authority or you cannot deal with this at all, you have to escalate it to the steering or directing layer. The next, and also another step in projects that they are complicated or they are very serious for your company or they are of high visibility, you might need to do also quantitative risk analysis with specific quantitative analysis programs. Why? Because you want to be able to say to your client or to the AGB in how much time you will finish the project or what is the percentage that the budget they have asked will be achieved. What I'm calling is also the risk avalanche effect. You have to avoid that. You have to avoid the fact that small risks, low risks will happen in a sequence or at the same time, and they will create a total impact of a high risk, like you can see on the slide. Like the avalanche where small pieces of snow are moving together and they are connected at some point of time, creating a total chaos. So be careful also the avalanche effect on your risks and try to identify correlations of risks through audits or rehearsals of concept drills, as the Army is calling them. The third step is the risk process development. During this phase, you are trying, as General Eisenhower said, expect the best, plan for the worst, and prepare to be surprised. You have also to be able to be flexible and also be able to bounce back, but also to be adjusted to the reality. If I would ask you why so many people have died when Titanic has sunk, you will tell me probably because they didn't have enough time to go and get inside the boats. But the actual reason is that Titanic didn't have a lot of boats, didn't have boats for all its passengers. And why that happened? Because the people that have built Titanic said, we have the boats that the law is obliged us to do. Although it wasn't the number they had to have according to the passengers. Sometimes during the development of the responses, we have to check if the low standards are low standards. And also, you have to have in your minds this second best practice that you don't have in your hands the horn of a mafia, limitless resources. Also, there is no money trees in the world. So you have to develop your resources, your responses according to your resources. And here we can see the choices we have about responses. On the left of the slide, you can see the responses about the threats, and on the right about opportunities. Usually what we want is to avoid all the threats and of course exploit all the opportunities. But this is not realistic. You cannot make the probability of all the threats 0, and you cannot make the probability of all opportunities 100. So you have, according to your resources, to see how you will manage your risks, how you will respond to your threats and opportunities. And you can see here on the bubbles on the left and the right some examples, like avoid to remove activities from the project or people who are not doing the work properly. Reduce is when you try to lower the probability and or the impact of a threat. Transfer or share is when you are bringing someone else with you in order him to manage the risk, but be careful there because the reputation risk stays on your shoulder in transfer or share. And on the right side, you have the exploit, as we said, when you try for an opportunity to make the probability of that opportunity to be 100%. You have enhance where you are trying the probability and or the impact to make it become bigger. And share is when you bringing someone else, a third party, on your project in order to try to make an opportunity happen or to gain more things for an opportunity. The common strategy in both cases is the acceptance strategy, where you are accepting usually low risks, threats or opportunities. And there, especially for this acceptance strategy, if you put some money aside or some time aside in order this risk that you already accepted to use this amount of money and time in order to make it happen or not make it happen if it is a threat, it is called active acceptance. Or you can also follow passive acceptance if it is a very low risk and you are thinking, okay, I have identified that, I'm accepting that, I will see what I will do with this one if it happens. And now, how we are dealing with the risks that we have in the likelihood and impact matrix during the risk responses development. Actually, we are trying with these responses for the opportunities to move all the opportunities to the yellow and red zone so as to make them have more impact and more likelihood to happen. And also for this, for every risk, here you can see we are writing down the name of a risk owner, the person who is responsible for that risk. And also for the threats, the same, we have a risk owner, but we are trying to lower down these threats to the ideal. It will be all the threats to be in the green zone after the responses, or at least at the yellow and green zone. So the risk log now is updated on its last part with the risk response strategy as a name, but also you have to put, and this is a common mistake, people do not put the description of that response, a detailed description. I like to put here the description by using the method of 5 Ws. So in one sentence, I'm describing the response with the 5 Ws method, which is the 5W method is who, what, when, where, why. So if you have that in one sentence, you will not have any problem. Also, do not forget to connect in this last column the risk log with a decision in the decision log, like 3.1 decision, or with some changes that you might implement because of that response. And here's an example from Netherlands. Before 6 months, I was discussing with a fellow NATO officer when I was in Italy, and he was from Netherlands. I was explaining to him how risk management can help our planning for an exercise, and I was explaining to him the risk responses. So while I was explaining to him the reduced response, he told me, yes, I remember that in one city, the city of Bodegraven in Netherlands in 2017, the mayor used that specific response. So that city had a huge problem with accidents. And the accidents were between a car, a motorcycle, or a bicycle, and a pedestrian. Why? Because usually the pedestrians were using their mobile phones while they were walking in order to chat, to play video games, to hear music, etc. So they didn't actually observe the traffic lights or the signs. And because the mayor couldn't do anything about reducing the impact of an accident, he tried the second version of reduced strategy, which was he tried to lower down the probability of an accident to happen. So what he actually did, he put the lights on the pavement. Why? Because everyone who is using a mobile phone, he is always looking down. So he could see easily the red light in order to stop before crossing a road, or the green one in order to start walking and cross the road. The last phase is the monitoring control risk phase. In that phase, two crucial techniques are the risk reassessment and the risk audits. Starting with risk reassessment, we have to ask ourselves, today as we are, and we have already assessed our risks and we have a probability and the impact. Our risks are evolving or not? So do we have any changes on probability and impact dimension of our risks? So we have to look forward in time to see how our risks are moving on. Of course, these risk reassessments have to schedule regularly, and we are dealing with risks, and we are updating the position of the risks inside the risk log according to the risk likelihood and risk impact, and of course, the risk level here. On the other hand, the risk audits are dealing with how effective and efficient are the risk activities and the risk procedures we are using. So we are asking ourselves, how did we do that? And we are conducting risk audits usually at major milestones. We are looking now back in time to see not only if we have gaps inside our risks processes, but also if we have created best practices, and we are writing them both in the risk audit report. And you know, it is very crucial to remember that the risk management plan, probably after a risk audit, will be updated. And the second thing is to remember that you are not trying to find the person who did the mistake, but to find out why the process was not that good in order to prevent that person from doing that mistake. Let's see a couple of examples. The first one is about the risk reassessment. Again, when I was in that coffee company, a huge problem we had was what we will do with the used coffee grounds, because everyone thought it wasn't useful after the use and the production of the coffee. And then a person came that he was recently working in one of their shops in England and said, well, I know that the used ground coffees in England, they are using them in order to produce a biodiesel. So all the shops of that company were giving now the used coffee rounds in order to produce biodiesel. Also in Greece, with cooperation of some universities, they are using the used coffee beans in order to produce fertilizer for specific plants. Or with some other companies, they are using used coffee grounds in order to restore furnitures. On the other hand, the aluminum from the capsules is collected and being used in order to produce bicycles that they are lighter in weight but more strong. You can use them even in mountains without having any problems. About risk audit, I would like to show you a case study from Pennsylvania county elections 1 year before, where the county there wanted to use this specific machine in order all the inhabitants there to vote. And you know, the procedure was very simple. You go to the screen, you select the candidate that you want to vote, you just press with your fingers in his name, and your vote is being counted. But also, fortunately, as a backup system, at the back of the machine, there is a ballot, and your vote is also being counted there by a small piece of paper that it is being thrown inside that ballot. The problem was that after the night of the election, when they went there to download the results, they saw that although 100,000 people have voted, only 10,000 votes were counted electronically. And that was very peculiar. At the beginning, they thought it is a cyber attack or something like this. But then they saw at the back of the machine that all the votes were there in a paper with the papers. So 100,000 votes by paper was inside the ballot. So they said something went wrong, and they were starting to go back to do a reverse engineering and see what has happened. And they found out that during the checks they have done for this machine, they didn't actually use human beings to push the screen in order to vote, but they did all the checks with the program, with just sticking a USB to the machine to see if something is working. So remember, whenever you have human beings in a process, use them also during your rehearsal of concept, the rock drills. Moving to the last part of my presentation, also do not forget that your risk log during the monitoring control activities, it is connected with the other logs. So when you are writing down a risk inside the risk log, and this risk becomes a reality, an issue, you have then to write it down, to transfer it to the issue log. And also, if a risk requires a decision to be made, for example, to implement a response or to use more money or more time for this risk, then you have to connect the risk to a decision log, to the decision log. Or maybe a decision that it is being made, it might create a new risk. It is a ripple effect. So you have to connect this decision with the risk log. The same with the changes. Maybe a risk will create a change request and a change, or a change request that it is about to become true. It might create a couple of risks. And of course, all the other logs are connected to each other. But you can see here that risk log is, of course, connected to the other three logs. Last slide for today, and I want you to have this as a takeaway. Remember that risk management is an iterative process. It has to be a part of the project culture. In order to achieve that and have these smiling faces like the company that we have finished the cycle of the risk management, is to read the PM2 mindsets. Inside there, you will find the glue. You will find this contract between the project team members that they will participate efficiently and effectively in the risk identification, risk assessment, risk response development, and risk control. But whenever they are finding out a new threat or a new opportunity, they will inform you so as to start again the whole process and become better, and also to update your risk management plan. Ending my presentation, I would like to say one last quote, which is, the only alternative to risk management is crisis management. But crisis management is much more expensive, time-consuming, and embarrassing, and usually leads to management of losses. And no one wants to manage losses. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, please write down in the Q&A part, and I will be delighted to answer them all the next hours. Thank you.